Hello everyone, I hope you're having a good day or evening, and in today's video we're going to be looking at a program developed in Object Pascal, Free Pascal, Lazarus, called Double Commander. Now this program here has been around since 2007. On the day after Christmas actually it was released. That's about 17 years ago. The latest stable release was on 7th of June 2025, so fairly current, and that makes it a good candidate to look at in terms of, well, what can we learn from looking at their source code, or the user interface, and things like that. Now, when I was got the program or downloaded the source code and built the program and looked at the screenshots, well, the first thing that I noticed was it was very similar to Norton Utilities, I think it was, from the early 90s. So if any of you are old enough to remember that one, well, I'd love to hear your thoughts about whether you used it, what you thought of it, and do you use Double Commander, and and your thoughts about that one. So as far as the file manager is concerned, it does all the normal operations like renaming, deleting trees, and so on, but you've also got tools for searching directories for files. You've got a text editor, file comparison tool, and a whole bunch more. It does have its own website as well, which we will be looking at to have a look at some of the screenshots, and you can see why, or I think that it has that same feel. It's actually based off I think it's set up here that it is actually based off, was inspired by Total Commander. But of course, Total Commander also had a problem being called, I think it was called Windows Commander at one time, and being Windows Commander, well, that was a trademark name. So, but the new version is very much developed for today. So if we go to the website now, and here we've got some screenshots of the application in action. And you've got, let's say, normally you'd have two sides, like two trees we may have where you want to do, let's say, a file copy. But here what we're looking at is images and directories, etc. You've got a menu up the top, a toolbar, and your drives, on the next row, and then you've got, let's say, folders or files being presented. Here is just a similar view in dark mode. What we've got here, you can modify what all your keys are. There's an options type dialog. You find files, and so on. Anything else here that's worth looking at? Well, what have we got? This one here allows you to see what files are in one folder and not in the other, and vice versa. You've got a tool here which will show you the differences between two files. Great if you're developing software. And now we're back at the beginning again. So when we go to the website GitHub, where you can get the source code from. We'll have all the links, by the way, in the description below. But when you do download the code, you are going to find that there are components as well. Now, whether you build a program from the command line or whether you use Lazarus, you may have to do a little bit more work involved there. But one of the nice things there's two nice things about this particular project, that's irrespective of the source code. The first is the amount of information that they do give to you, in order to build the software. So, we'll just skip over needing these particular libraries on Linux, but it does say here that if you do want to use the Lazarus IDE, then you will need to install these packages manually, and these packages do come as part of the download. so you don't have to worry about, well, where do I go to find them? But if you do want to use the command line to build them, well, then it's almost just a case so you can build a release, or you can just do a las build sort of program on the double command LPI itself, I think. It also, by the way, does have guidelines for developers and how to write their code. So rather than your project having 4 or 5 different programming styles, and I will say, while this one sums everything up in one sentence, it does say here, generally there are no specific coding style decided. Use the style of the surrounding code. Well, luckily the developers, use the style, I guess, of the let's say Delphi, early Delphi, or even current Delphi, really, and Pascal case, and 2 spaces for tabs, etc. And also they do use comments a fair bit, so which is also helpful, and we'll see that when we come to look at the code. So I think it's about time when we jump into the code itself. And so let's just minimize that window there, and we'll start. It will just start the main unit before we start looking at how double command handles exceptions and what they do for debugging purposes. So first of all, here we have, let's say normal comments up the top here. You will see a whole bunch of actions. Now, if you're not sure what actions are, we may be able to explain that in a future video, so let me know in the comments also. This program also does use frames, which are another feature, we'll say, of Lazarus, Delphi, Free Pascal. So again, if something that you are not familiar with and would like to find out more about, also let me know in the comments, and something that we could check out in a future video. So here we are in the form create code, and we're talking about comments before. And it does say here something like handling, main form receives on closing events on system shortcut command Q. See these details here. So, it's got something, specific for that application, and that's why that code is there. Similarly, you'll find something, it tells you here that, we've got a workaround for layout and line. See this link here for more details, and you've got that sort of code, the code there. Also here you can see here that we've got some code here that says we're fixing a bug, and and again another link. So these are all helpful for when a developer looks at something, why am I doing it this way, or why is this being done, or and so on. So what I thought here was how does this program here deal with exceptions? And I found this particular unit here, exceptions. So by the way, we are also, I don't want to say unlike our previous video where we had units 1 to 14, here all of the units are used to have some sort of meaningful name in them. Now we can see here we've got some functions like exception to string, write an exception to a file, to an error file, showing a dialog, and then we've got this function here, or procedure I should say. And the second function, or the second parameter, is also optional. So if we were to, let's just say, jump down to that particular function and see what happens, well, let us go into this function here, and it essentially just redirects it to a handle exception object, and that'll be a bit lower down, and we will see what that code does. So if we're in the main, we've got code if we're in the main thread, and then we've also got some code here if we're running in the context of a thread. The main reason for this is that if you do have code that is running in the context of a thread, you do not want that particular thread to do anything, user interface oriented. And you will see here that after it's written an error to a file, that it will, also then try and display something to the screen. And again, here what we're doing is so we can ensure that it's all multi-threading or threading safe, that we're going to acquire a lock, do some work, and then release that lock. Well, actually, in this case here, it does actually, does the synchronize in the context of the thread, but we'll just move past that for the moment. So what we have here essentially are a couple of functions here that you can use anywhere and everywhere in your application where an exception might occur and you want to maybe display something to the user. Not only will it be consistent to the user, but you can also have it logged to files as well, being in a debug file, an error file, or otherwise. When it does go to, let's just move back to see where we are. So we get the exception message, and we get a stack trace of the message itself. Now that stack trace will be written to an error file. So when we write that to an error file here, okay, write exception to file here. You can see here that it will basically, if we don't have an error file, it will exit. Assuming we have a file, then it will either append to it or create it before writing out the message to a file. We're just using the classic assign file, write line, close file type operations. Nothing magical there. It's small and it's fast, so you don't need to do anything too crazy as far as being, wanting to be object oriented as such. The next little part then, which we saw in the handle exception, was that it would then show the message to screen. Now if you don't want to show the message to screen, then you would just turn off the no exception messages, or maybe in this case here you would set that if you didn't want to have it, but if the no exception messages were not set, then you'd also get a dialog displaying the message itself. As far as the exception message being presented, it just uses a message dialog here, perfect for their instance again. It'll be neatly formatted using the format statement, where you'll get a error file line ending with the options to ignore or abort. It's also an error message, and the default button will be ignore. Now what you can do though is, if you wanted to, rather than just using a standard message type dialog, you could incorporate your own error dialog, where you could give a user options to copy the text, if you had like the error in a memo field, or you could email the text back to the developer. Not all users, by the way, not all users will be tech savvy, so the easier you can make things for a user, sometimes the better that can be. And again, you're going to have a consistent consistent means of being able to present these errors, regardless of where you are in your program then. And rather than having to let's say have different message dialogues in different exception handlers, this way here just does it in a neat, simple way, so that you can basically just do in your code try code except on, and for instance on exception do handle exception close brackets. That's about it to it, or there would be to it. So it's a nice little function to be able to manage your exceptions. The next one here is the debug unit from Double Commander also. This particular instance or version of it is also thread safe, and you're going to, well, why am I looking at this particular one? Well, the reason why we're going to be looking at this one is because it's actually using the LazLogger or the LazLogger file. So it's actually using an existing, or it's actually extending the capabilities of an extending class within Lazarus to do something more. And what you'll find then is that this particular logger then, to be thread safe, it does incorporate a critical section, but it's debug functions, which are, let me just see if we can scroll to the right a bit here. They override the do debug line and do debug output functions. So we're going to be using these ones instead of the other, the ones from the LazLogger file. So if we go down to the initialization function, so what we're going to say here is that the Laz debug logger creator is going to be our create DC logger, and then it will recreate the debug logger. So what does that do? Well, the recreate debug logger will ultimately come down to here and creates our logger, gets an existing debug logger before setting the log param for log file name. So we're basically going to have a debug log as as part of the file name, and so that when something like one of these functions here get called, debug args, where are we here, debug line, what will happen then is that when we want to write out our message to a debug file, what will happen then is that the lock will be acquired. It will call the existing function, so basically ensures the same output before releasing the lock, and you'll find the same thing happens here. So rather than having to write, let's say, their own debugging tools or functions to implement an entire debugger, what they're doing here is to extend the functionality of a LazLogger file to meet their needs. So while I may have said in a previous video that, well, okay, the LazLogger file, it's okay, but it doesn't do this and this. Well, this shows you that some of that stuff can be added in quite easily, and you have you got a file here now which is only about with the spacing in it, it's only about 150 lines long, and of those 150 lines, half of those are, well, maybe a third of those is the interface itself. Again, we do have that good commenting here, to explain how things are done and so on. Now, I did mention to you before also about, I'm not sure whether we'll go here actually. When you do wander through the code, there may be other little tiny things which pique your curiosity. And one that I saw here, and this is just, let's say, I'm going to call this one of those, I don't want to say glorified or util units which have everything in it, or that's miscellaneous I'm talking about, but I want to find a contrasting color. So how do I do that? Well, this particular unit has such a function like that in it. So, ultimately saying if the color is light, we want a dark color. Otherwise, the color must be dark, so we want a light color. So, how do we tell whether a color is light or dark? Well, here is our function, how they determine whether something is light. So basically, it's got a calculation here, which I'm not going to go into depth on, but let's say it's greater than 50%, so we're closer to white. And then, depending upon whether that's true or false, it will then do either that function or that function there to work out the opposite color or the contrasting color that we could use. So think of a foreground and a background, what goes well together. In these cases here, in the case of wanting a darker color, we will do a mul-div sort of operation going closer towards black, and here we're going mul-div again, adding closer to the white color there. So, when you look at something, when you look at the code of other software, you may find little things that say, no, that might be useful here. So that is almost about it for this particular video. Oh, I did forget to say though, what you will find here though is in terms of these functions here or procedures in these units, you can see the amount of comments here that they have for each function. So you don't necessarily have to go down and look at the implementation to see how they work. The comments here should provide you with enough information. So now it is the end, and I hope you were able to get something out of this video here. Download the code, see what you find. Tell me, did you find anything useful yourself in the code? What would you take away from it? What might you steal from it even? So, on that note, till next time, happy coding, and I'll see you then, and bye.